David Masondo as well, also getting some questions on that platform. And beyond the assessment of the budget, the discussion aims to reflect on the macroeconomic framework that informs the budget and whether there are real alternatives. Let's take you to that virtual briefing now.
Prof. Malikane will unpack what more the South African Reserve Bank can do to support productive economic activity. At the heart of this matter also lies the question about what the legal constraints of doing so are. Prof. Malikane is also allocated 10 minutes. And finally, the discussion, as you know, this is a post-budget debate, will be structured where the discussants will have an opportunity following the 30-minute presentation by the panelists, and they will be first given 5 minutes each to directly comment or question the Honourable Deputy Minister, who's our guest speaker. The first discussant who I'll be introducing is Dr. Dick Forslund. Dr. Dick Forslund is a socialist economist who has contributed to the activist think tank AIDC as a researcher, educator, and trade union assistant. The second discussant is Dr. Duma Qubule. Duma Qubule is an economist and former financial journalist. He is also the founding director at the Center for Economic Development and Transformation. The third discussant is Reg Nkosi. Reg is the executive director of FitSource Money and Public Banking South Africa, a research and advisory organization that specializes in macroeconomics, money, banking, and development economics. Finally, I would like to welcome all the participants who have joined us today for the webinar, and I will now hand over to Busisi Beko.
I thought Mr. Masondo was going first.
Oh, excuse me. Sorry, Mr. Masondo, please do go first.
Okay, thanks, Siko. You know, when the poster was circulating to advertise this event, people were saying, you're going to be eaten alive there. Where are you going? and my response was that as public representatives, we do need to engage everyone in society, regardless of what we think of their ideas. So I'm ready to be eaten alive. I'm your lunch today. This is what I've signed for as a public representative. And one thing I considered to some of the people who were commenting was that it's the panel, you should have had someone who will put a different view and all that. And I said, look, I think that's the problem generally in South Africa, both on the right and the left. The way we constitute our panels, they tend not to be very diverse, because I've attended other debates in which the thinking was by and large more or less the same. So I'm sure at some point we'll find a way of diversifying our panels, both sides. I'm not. So the second point I want to make, Siko, the minister was not happy with the first advert in which you put this picture. And I said, am I that ugly that you could not put my picture? You had to find the poster of the minister. He felt that it was not with his consent and it was a misleading advert and we should not do it again. So my assumption is that I'm going to assume that everyone who's listening here has read the budget speech, and I'm here for discussions, for debate. And if I to be eaten alive, that's okay. I hope I'll come out alive. I may temporarily die in this platform, but I will still come out alive after it. So the way I've organized my input is as follows. One, I'll just state why this special adjustment budget and the context within which it is presented. And I think some of the points Siko has already taken my words, and state its context content in terms of what it seeks to achieve. I'm not going to go into the detail because, like I said, I assume that everyone has read it. Before my 20 minutes it's finished, let me summarize what my argument will be. The first thing I want to say in terms of argument, or what I'm saying in this input, is that the fiscal policy is constrained. In fact, it was even constrained before this COVID, and it is even constrained in the current period of COVID. However, other policy instruments which are outside the national treasury may have more space to make us breathe, and national treasury is not in control of those policy instruments. For instance, the trade policy, we don't tell ITEC at what level should they reduce or increase the tariffs. Legally, they are responsible for the tariffs. The labor market policy, some of the changes that people want, there's a process. It depends on the NEDLAC negotiations. We don't set wages as National Treasury. That's the outcome of struggle between labor and business and employers. So the expectations, therefore, of National Treasury should be understood within this context. However, we do need to look at the totality of the country's balance sheet if we are to make more additional interventions to get out of the situation in which we find ourselves in. But the use of the country's balance sheet should be used in such a manner that we don't blow up the assets in the same way as we've blown up the fiscus. And therefore, we need to think about the possible instruments, policy instruments that will enhance economic growth and development. And I must say that some of these arguments that I'm going to present here are entailed in a working paper that I'm working on. I use this paper to engage different stakeholders to be thinking about these issues. And I'm hoping that this conversation will also help me to identify certain blind spots insofar as the certain things that we need to be thinking about. But I will publish the paper hopefully before the end of this week or early next week. Now, why? Let's go to the first question, which was why this budget? We all know that this budget was occasioned by the outbreak of the COVID, which disrupted the incomes of different economic agents, workers, business, including the state, because the tax revenue was hit by this COVID, and the workers have been losing their wages, and businesses, the serious cash flow problems, which generated liquidity challenges. And our interventions was to make sure that the liquidity challenges, they don't eventually lead to the solvency, workers' wages, they get protected in some ways. We might not have done enough to do so, and I'm sure we'll hear more from my colleagues in this panel. And I think a lot of economists, they've summed it up, the impact of COVID, they've summed it up in terms of its impact on the demand side and the supply side. And government's response government has responded through fiscal and monetary policies, and our response can be classified into three phases, or we've classified our responses into three phases. The first phase was largely to make sure that we stabilize the households' income, businesses' incomes, and the monetary policy. There have been different interventions, particularly in the second phase of our intervention, in which they cut the repo rate, buying bonds in the secondary market. And I think if you read the Financial Stability Review, which they published in April, the Reserve Bank also indicated that they are ready, I'm quoting them here, that open quote, the Reserve Bank stands ready to take additional action should the need arise. Now, the purpose of the special budget was simply to get authorization from Parliament on the 500 billion stabilization, which was already announced by government. As you know, we can't spend money without the permission of the legislature. So even ourselves as National Treasury, we don't finally determine what goes where. It is Parliament itself which has a final decision authority insofar as how we spend the money, how we tax people and all that. So the power that is usually ascribed to Treasury, I sometimes feel that it's over-exaggerated because we don't, in the final analysis, determine the budget. And that is why even this budget, the conversations are going on within Parliament. And it's in the final analysis, the Parliament, which must say, okay, this budget, we approve it, and therefore go and spend. So the budget, at the risk of repeating myself, it's the Parliament which eventually take a decision on how we spend. I think SICO has already laid out that this budget was presented against the context where you had low economic growth, there was already technical recession, and this low economic growth, it's deepening. The first quarter results are out, the economy has declined by 2%, and the pre-COVID unemployment statistics are scaring. 31% people are unemployed, essentially 10 million people. It's like the population of some of the countries, both in the global north and in the global south. So unemployment is deepening. Inequality is also deepening. We are one of the most unequal societies in the world. And public debt is increasing. Our projection is that the debt is going to increase by almost 4 trillion. And I think it's important for all of us to accept that unemployment, low growth, the rise of the public debt, inequality, it's a symptom. In themselves, these indicators, they are not the problem themselves, but they're generated. And there have been different ways of understanding this problem. Some of the people, they understood them in technocratic ways that, no, if you sort out the technical capacity of the state, these problems will go away. This technocratic way of looking at it, yes, it provides and prescribes certain specific policy remedies to restore the functionality of our economy. But it has certain shortcomings, which is that it doesn't look at the systemic origins of the challenges that we're facing, unemployment, the rise of the public debt. But there's also a very populist way of understanding this problem, which is really about, no, this is crisis we're in. This is a result of the greedy business people, corrupt politicians. This is provide a moral story and provides a moral solution that get bad people in and get good people in. I don't deny the fact that you do have corrupt individuals within the state, within the economy, but it doesn't tell you about the structural roots of the challenge that we're basically facing. And of course, there is an anti-capitalist way of understanding this problem, which gets into the root of the problem that we are facing, the intra-competition between business, which generate a lot of pathologies, which I'm not going to get into now. So, but I think what we must also appreciate is that the alliance government, we are united not to overthrow the capitalist system, but to transform it or reform it in such a way that it produces better economic outcomes. And therefore, in doing so, investment is quite critical. The cost of reducing the doing business in South Africa is critical, but also improving the living conditions of the poor. So we're not, as the alliance and as government, seeking to overthrow the capitalist system. Our task is how, particularly its colonial nature, how do we transform it in such a way that it produces better developmental outcomes? So let me come back to the issue around the public debt. Having said that, from the budget that the minister has presented, the special budget, like I said, we project that the public debt, and like I said, the public debt is one of the problems. It's not the only problem that we are facing in South Africa. Public debt is one of those problems that we are facing. And like I said, 4 trillion public debt that we have, and the deficit is going to increase to almost 1,770 billion. The debt service cost, when the minister was presenting the budget, he pointed out that we're paying 230 billion. This was in February to service the debt. And I must indicate that borrowing in itself, it's not bad, but what are you borrowing for? And that's a point that I'm going to come back to.
All right, that's the post-budget debate. There, of course, the Deputy Finance Minister, David Masondo speaking there. And of course, it will be quite a long one. The network, unfortunately, is quite bad at this point. Let's see what we can do about it. And if it can get better, we'll bring it then back to you. We'll have a discussion on this with our analyst later on, Owen Ngomo from Nkunzi Investments, of course, who